All right, thank you. Welcome. This is the second community meeting for our swimming pool feasibility study and process that we have been undertaking. And for those that are listening or watching this tape at a later date, it is being taped by Auburn Cable Television, and it will run on our cable television channels, as does the first one, that you can also see the first meeting. So I'm just going to run you through this and just explain why we're doing this study, what it's all about, what we've asked the consultant to do, and the purpose of this evening's meeting. So before I go further, I just want to tell you that we did hire a consultant, BSC, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And we have Jeff Vassar and Steve Camuso here. So between the three of us, we will be sharing the results of a lot of the research and analysis that's taken place so far. So again, tonight's agenda, why we're doing it, what have we asked the consultant to do, what's the purpose, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who's going to do the survey and the public input responses that we received. And we've got some great responses in the survey, which is really nice. And then we're going to talk about the community preferences, and Jeff's going to run through that, and the costs, the preliminary costs of what is it going to be to build this, and what do we need if we want to build this. So, and then lastly, we're going to end up with an open discussion. Hopefully we get input from you, that's why we're here, answer some questions, and just have a dialogue about how the town may want to proceed. So I think the number one thing I just want to make clear, the town administration, we cannot make any kind of decisions or make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen without the proper data and without the proper research. So that's what we're doing. And I will look at this, go through this with you after, but I just think it's important to know, and I just want to make sure I'm not jumping out of turn here too much, but and we're going to get into this a little later as under the purpose and why we're doing this, but I just want to be clear, anytime we have the opportunity to move forward on a public facility, we want to gather input from residents. We want to gather your thoughts. We want to see if this is something you want us to do. And all of this comes together in the form of a report at the end that's made to the Board of Selectmen, along with the recommendation. So the town applied for it and was awarded a $30,000 grant from the Pappas Foundation. And I'm very pleased to say that Dr. Martha Pappas is here with us this evening. And we will mention a little bit more about this, but the reason that Dr. Pappas is here and we applied for this grant is Dr. Pappas, through the Pappas Foundation, has very generously offered the town $1 million toward a swimming pool. Dr. Pappas and the late Dr. Arthur Pappas both felt very strongly about swimming and the need for all children to learn how to swim. So Dr. Pappas approached town administration and said she would like to make this donation to the town to build a pool. But prior to town administration being able to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, we need to understand what the costs are. And I say to the Board of Selectmen because that's the first step, but to the public in general, to the residents and to the taxpayers of this community, we need to understand what the costs are going to be, how it will impact you, and have a good community discussion on whether we should proceed with this. So we did apply for the grant. The grant enabled us to hire a consultant. We went out to bid for it, and we selected the BSC Group, which has a lot of experience doing very similar municipal facilities all over, well, here in Massachusetts, but outside of Massachusetts as well. The purpose of this, again, is to determine and gather data to see, is there demand for a swimming pool amongst the residents? What types of pools are out there? What types of programs would the residents be interested in seeing us offer if we did this? Very importantly, what is the cost to construct the different types of swimming facilities? What are the annual operating costs? What costs are there that go into not just your annual operating costs, but your maintenance costs, your repair costs, and what types of dollars should we be looking at for the future? Also with this, we have to look at different types of management. Do you do it in-house? Do you outsource it? And again, the bigger question would be then, where would you put a swimming pool? And that question has to actually be answered a little later, because first you need to decide what kind of facility you want. Because the type of facility you want dictates the size of the acreage that you need to have to support it. We also want to look at potential funding sources in addition to the generous donation of $1 million. So we have a survey out there. The survey is closed now because we wanted to close it down in anticipation of this evening's meeting, because we didn't want to have any additional survey responses get inputted and have us not be able to capture them in time to give it to you tonight. So that survey has been out there for about, I want to say maybe 2 months now. And we've solicited some good feedback from that, which you're going to hear about. This, again, BSC is also conducting research and analysis. We've conducted some preliminary here on the town side, but this is not our forte. We've not built swimming pools, so we wanted to turn to the experts to actually do the more specific analysis for us. And again, this is the second meeting. The first one was held on May 7th, and I see some of you are here. So I apologize if some of this is repetitive from the meeting in May, but for those who weren't here, I just thought it was important to kind of set the stage as to why we're all here. I won't go into much the preliminary research that the town did, other than to say that we looked at the following towns that you can see and tried to get some preliminary data on what are their operating costs, what do they charge for fees, how do they do it, are they happy, and then we turn that data all over to BSC, which is not just looking at that data, but really have expanded a lot. I would tell you that the main themes that kind of came out of our initial research is that most municipalities do charge a fee for daily or seasonal passes. Some do not. Most do, because that's where they get their revenues that help offset their costs. Most swimming pools operate at an annual deficit unless you can generate enough revenues to offset that deficit. The deficits range based on the size of the pool, the size of the community, so the dollars really don't matter. What we found is somewhere between $37,000 and $400,000 a year. It really, you can't apply that. You need to look at Auburn specifically, which is what BSC is doing for us. And the operational costs also vary widely. You know, for a very small facility that might not have a lot of either amenities, or it might be so small it might have already been on existing land, from $18,000 up to almost $600,000, depending on what you offer. And just keep in mind the costs, and people say, well, what does it really cost to run a pool? It will include staff, the certifications, training, chemicals, all your utilities, your supplies, your inspections, your routine maintenance and repair, winterization if it's an outdoor facility, ongoing maintenance if it's an indoor facility. So there's a lot that went to it. So I'm going to turn it over now. That's the basic, that's a little bit of the history of why we're here, and turn it over to Steve Camuso, who's going to talk to you about the survey and the results. Thanks.
All right, I am going to talk a little bit about the survey and the public input responses. And we saw about 350 more additional responses from the last time we held our meeting. So a pretty good jump there. We saw a little bit of changes here and there. So by doing this, we're able to get a better sense of community purposes, and then from that determine what some costs might look like. So question one started off with, would your family use it? This one stayed pretty consistent percentage-wise, right around 56%. There wasn't too much change in that with the additional 350 there. And then from there, it went to how often would you use it. We saw a little bit of an increase in the 3 to 5 times a week, decrease in the 6 times a week. And then the 1 to 2 stayed about the same. Do you currently have access to a swimming pool? We did see a slight increase in the no there, so it evened it out by like 0.6%, it's almost 50-50. Question 4 was, would you prefer an indoor pool to an outdoor pool? And this stayed pretty consistent as well. Indoor pool took a huge lead there with about 70%. And then from there, we wanted to see what type of features you would want in the pool. Or in the area, and lap pool still high up there, and we saw increases in the kiddie pool since the last time. The kiddie pool, the outdoor splash pad, and the concession stand. Those were the 3 that kind of took a little bit of a jump there. If the town were to construct a swimming pool facility, would you or members of your family, what would you use the pool for? This one stayed very consistent with family, and the recreational went up just like 2%. So that one stayed very constant. Allocating the funds to build the pool stayed about the same. 50% said yes, 27 no, with 24 maybe. On the next one is where we saw a little bit of a difference with the operation costs. We saw that the maybe went down and the yes went up. So there was about say 30 of the maybes then switched over to, they would allocate the funds towards the operation, but they were not sure about the building of it. And the last question that we had on there was, would you be willing to pay a fee for either daily use or a season pass? And the yes did go up, I would say about 3% on that. No went down slightly, and maybe, and the comments down there went up maybe like 2%. So that's kind of what the survey looked like, and now we could take that information and pull it into what we're going to be talking to next with the community preferences and the cost. So I'll have Jeff come up and go over that with you.
Again, thank you all for coming tonight. As Steve said, I'm going to go into kind of the next step of this process and start talking about, based on all this input we got from the survey, as well as at the last meeting, we had a number of ways for people to provide input. Those of you who came know there were different boards you could vote on to indicate your preferences, and also some one-on-one dialogue. And that information was pretty consistent with what we found in the survey information. So we bundled that all together to start to focus in on what would the community really like to see in a facility like this, and therefore, as Julie said earlier, what's it going to cost to build it and operate it, and where could, what type of land area do we need for a facility like that the community would want. So that's what we're going to go into next. So as for the preferences, as you can tell from, maybe remember from Steve's talk about the survey, we looked at all those preferences that the community expressed to us, and we also looked at those pool features or facilities or programs that generate income. We have on our team another consultant. Her name is Barbara Heller. She's a recreation specialist. She does studies like this all over the country, but mostly East Coast, including pool facilities. So she's been a great help in advising us on, yeah, this is what the community wants, which we should satisfy. And then in addition to that, there are certain things that will help generate revenue to help offset the cost for this. So taking all that information into consideration, our first recommendation is looking at a pool that has these elements, and the preference was for a year-round indoor pool with a 25-meter lap pool, a therapy pool, which would be a heated pool, not a hot tub, but a heated pool for exercise, a kiddie pool, a concession stand, and then an outdoor facility, also a splash pad and shade for an outdoor use. And any type of indoor outdoor facility would require restrooms and changing rooms. We then looked at how would people use this facility. Certainly swimming lessons is number one. That's one of the main reasons this project's being done. And it's also an income generator. Special events and birthday parties were popular and also an income generator. Exercise classes, especially with the aging population, very popular. Again, good revenue stream from them. Swim teams, lifeguard training, and other types of training. It could be underwater diver training. I just have pictures of kayak, learning how to row a kayak in a canoe, so a whole number of other things that could happen when it comes to training in a pool facility. But those are the top ones that we were trying to accommodate, knowing there was interest for them as well as potential revenue source for people using the pool facility for these different programs. A couple other additional things came up, especially when you start talking about cost. An indoor pool is going to cost a lot more than an outdoor pool. So at the last meeting, some people came to the table I was at and said, well, what if we had an outdoor pool to put a dome over it, one of these inflatable bubbles or domes over it, so, which would extend the use season of the pool. So we looked into that. There was also a discussion of ice skating. If we have an area like this, could it be also used in the wintertime for skating? Not that you would freeze the pool surface, but the facility itself might be able to be designed to accommodate skating. We found this example from Central Park in New York City. On the left, that's the pool in the warm weather, and on the right, that's the same pool area with no water in it, but with a frozen bottom used for skating. So there are examples of how pools can be used for that purpose. And then before I get to the costs on top, and then we did look into the dome too, and the prices ranged quite a bit, and here we're being conservative. Again, not knowing exactly what size pool facility you're going to end up with, but if you went with a dome, you could cover it with this, as you can see, that white covered dome there, probably up to $500,000 for a bubble like that. Again, we're being conservative. It could be less than that. Some of the other numbers we found were a lower square foot cost. So we're on the high end here, so you're not scaring people if it comes, if you want to go this route and all of a sudden it is $500,000 and you're only expecting $300,000. As for construction costs, and I'll get into this a little more later, but this will vary quite a bit depending upon the size of the facility. But we looked at the different facilities, the preferences that we have listed out already, and said, all right, how much area do we need to support those facilities, and roughly what would it cost to build an indoor facility to accommodate all those preferences? Again, the lap pool, the kiddie pool, therapy pool, concession stand to support facilities that are necessary. Indoor, a range of 12 to 14. And please, these are very preliminary because we don't have a design in front of us that we're actually taking quantities from. But based on other facilities around the country, specifically more focused on the East Coast, that's the range we're looking at. If it was an outdoor facility, excuse me, it's about $6 to $8 million. And that would include those additional splash pad and the shade areas. So between the indoor and outdoor, the basic facilities would be the same. When you get to the outdoor, that also accommodates a splash pad and shade area for people to get out of the sun. Over and above that, maybe you do a weather barrier, the bubble or dome on top, again, which could be up to $500,000 on top of the cost of the outdoor facility. So that starts to give you an idea of the magnitude of cost for what you have expressed a preference for. We're sharing this with you because not everybody, there was a high majority that voted for an indoor facility, but we want you to understand the cost, and that's going to be one of the discussion items tonight. Now knowing what that cost might be, we'd like to get your opinions on, are you still more interested in an indoor one, or maybe an outdoor one meets your needs for much less of a cost? We also started just doing some initial thoughts on the operation costs, and Julie talked about earlier with some of the research that was done. Operating costs range quite a bit depending on, again, the size of the facility or whether it's indoor or outdoor. Some of this is no-brainer, but I'm going to go through it. An indoor facility will have a higher operating cost. One, it's operating year-round, and second of all, there's just some more features to it that add to the operating cost. At the same time, there's a higher revenue potential because, again, you have that year-round revenue source potential coming into it. However, Barbara, again, who's our expert on this, said it's very unlikely that the revenue will offset the operating costs. And again, the revenue is a whole number of factors that go into it. How many facilities you have, how many programs you run, how many special, how many people rent it out for special events, what you charge for fees. But she said, looking at all the data she's looked at, they typically do not cover their operating costs. So it's going to be offset somehow. At an outdoor facility, it's a lower operating cost, a lower revenue potential because it's a shorter season. If you add the dome, that extends the season, so that might bring in some more revenue. It's also going to be a higher operating cost. But Barbara said, in outdoor facilities, there is a potential, if you structure things properly, to offset the operating costs with the revenue. That's not a guarantee. Most likely there is going to be some deficit, especially in the first couple of years. Excuse me, let me get my water. But there's a higher likelihood you can offset your operating costs with your revenue on an outdoor facility. So that's something to keep in mind also. Also, when it comes to cost, based on the survey results, people in town, there was support for allocating additional town funding to help support the construction of a facility. You can see the numbers there. 48 said yes, they would be willing to support town funding. 27% said maybe. There was also support for allocating town funds to support the operation of a facility. And there was a willingness to pay a fee for the daily or seasonal use, again, slightly more than 50%. So that helps you understand how residents of Auburn feel about having some of their money go towards the different aspects of this facility. How much area do you need? And again, it depends on indoor, outdoor, and depends on how big everything is, indoor and outdoor, whichever direction you go. But roughly, it's looking at the different, again, preferences and being a little bit conservative, about 1.5 acres to 2 acres for an indoor facility, and that would include the parking associated with that facility. For an outdoor facility, it's larger, 2 to 2.5 acres. And again, that's partially because we've added the splash pad and a shade area for the outdoor facility. But as we all know, there's a variation on how large these different elements could be. And just wanted to show you some examples. On the left side is a lap pool, but this one has a ramp that goes into it, so someone in a wheelchair can go in and out of that pool. So that obviously adds square footage to the pool, adds to the cost of the pool. Other options are having a seat that lowers people in and out of the pool, which doesn't take up as much space. On the right side is a therapy pool, a rather small one. Some of the other ones we found were much larger than this. So that's something we'd have to talk about. How large is this therapy pool? How large should it be? And obviously that'll affect the cost. Indoor facilities, again, its size, how they're arranged, how much space is around them, how the different elements are bundled together within that building. And these are kind of two extremes here, but on the right side is an outdoor pool, a lap pool, and off to the side more of a kiddie pool, so they're all connected. On the left side, and again, this is an extreme, but you can see a much larger complex with a larger lap pool and a larger kiddie pool or family pool. So there's a lot of variation here of what could be in your facility if you go in this direction. So what we want to do tonight is, first of all, do you have any questions about the material we presented? And then second of all, we have questions we want to ask you about what you've heard, your preferences, what direction you think we should be headed at this point. And these questions are on the back of your agenda too. But first of all, Julie and I are here to help answer any questions you may have about the information presented. I can keep my voice.
I think one of the questions I want to ask Jeff, and I'm sure people are thinking of this, so the pool being $6 to $8 million for the outdoor facility with, let's just call it the bells and whistles that we took from the survey that people wanted to have. If you were to take away some of those, is there a way to ultimately come up with, I know not tonight, but come up with more of a base price where then you could add things back in? So if we got a basic pool with what's required under state law, which are recreational outdoor facilities require bathrooms, changing rooms, what would that base cost be? And then go back and look and say, well, we wouldn't mind then adding in the splash park for X dollars, or just try to get an idea, or is that 6 to 8? Six being on the low end.
No, that's typically how we do the cost estimate. We break it down into different components, so we're able to do that.
Okay, great. And also want to clarify, when we asked the question in the initial survey about whether you'd be willing to put in additional dollars, by additional dollars, we mean dollars above and beyond what the donation would be, because the donation is an enormous amount of money. It's a very generous donation, and as you can see, there will be additional funds that would be required from the town. So that's the idea was, would you be willing to have the town raise the additional funding? So what we're working on our side is to come up with what the tax impacts would be. It's a little preliminary because you can see the range. 6 to 8 for an indoor, 12 to 14, 6 to 8 for an outdoor, 12 to 14 for an indoor. Quite a large range. We have to work with our financial advisors at Univan that actually take the numbers and drill down into them and work with the assessor to come up with what some common tax impacts could be. And just a really preliminary one would say for a $6 million, for a $4 million facility, it would range from, $300 to $600 per house, depending on the median family income, the median household valuation. So it is all over the place. We didn't want to throw a number out tonight because I want you to walk out and say it's going to cost this amount. It may or may not, because we might be able to come back with a lower cost than some of the things that come here. So we didn't want that to be the reason, even though that is going to be one of the factors that people need to consider before we give you that factor. We want you to see all the other elements that go into this. And I should also mention Rachel Pressey from my office is here, and she's, if you think of anything after, her name has shown up on a lot of things on the social media, ACTV, and you can certainly email your thoughts, or sometimes you leave a meeting and say, oh, I wish I had thought of that, I wish I had said that. It's not too late. If you don't say it tonight, get back to us and get in touch with Rachel or call our office. We're happy to take comments if you want to send any letters. I should also point out that we have our Director of Development and Special Services, Darlene Coyle, here, and the Assistant Director and Health Inspector, Eileen. And between Darlene and Eileen and Rachel, we're all here to just hear what your concerns are or comments are. Yes?
One of the things that was brought up at the last meeting was, and I think you mentioned this in your town, if an indoor facility is built, also building a big enough facility so you can have a gym and sell memberships to that. And I didn't see that in the presentation, but as anyone looked at it, that would help defray some of the operating costs if that was done.
Thanks for bringing that up. No, we didn't include that in our preferences right now, but yes, I did ask Barbara that question again. She's the one who advised us on that the first time, that fitness, indoor pools associated with fitness facilities typically come closer to breaking even or have much less of a deficit because of that fitness facility. And she reiterated that to me when we prepared for tonight, that is the case. That's her opinion and based on her research, yes.
Just had, for the numbers that you prepared for the presentation, do you have a ballpark of the size of the pool for that cost? Yeah,
all those costs were based on a 25-meter lap pool. Lanes, we have this all spelled out. I think it was 8 lanes. And then the kiddie pool was about 40 by 40, and the therapy pool, they range, but for our costs it was more like 20 by 20, but we found some that are 75 meters for therapy pools, which I was not aware they made them that big, but there were some places that have very big therapy pools because they do swim laps in them, but obviously for a different purpose than race. Well, it's exercise, but it's also
So is it fair to say that obviously if you're including all of this in the cost, if we, to Julie's point, if we were to find out what residents were looking towards, you might be able to modify the cost to, say, just a lap pool and a kiddie pool, or a lap pool and a therapy pool, like a...
Yeah, we definitely would. And again, there are a lot of variables here.
Sure.
There could be a lap pool with an L off one end that becomes the kiddie pool. That you could just have a lap pool, and for some days or hours of each day, it's for swimming and exercise, and other times it's free swim, and other times it's rented out for special events, so you don't need a separate kiddie pool. There are some, whether it's indoor or outdoor, that have the lap pool and then a separate family pool, which is kind of like the kiddie pool but bigger. It's more for family use, that has slides that come into it, and those are very popular and generate a lot of revenue. There's obviously more cost associated with that. So there's a lot of variables here.
How deep would it be?
The kiddie pools are usually in the 3 to 4 foot range. The family pools tend to be up to 6 foot range, and they taper because they're for families, so smaller at one end, deeper at another. The lap pools are typically 8 feet. I don't know, Steve, you may know better on this, but I think they're typically 8 feet. We did not include a diving pool. That was one of our questions. There was some interest in that, but it wasn't one of the higher low hitters. Obviously, they were a lot deeper.
That would be
Were some of the responses that you guys received in the survey similar to other towns that did this? So like we're talking about Holden, were their responses, and but whatever you've done in the past, is 50% good, or you usually see 75, or we usually get a range? Because if 50% of Auburn residents have access to a pool already, and 50% are willing to pay, like what percentage of the town actually wants the pool? Just don't know if we have that information.
Unfortunately, I don't know. It's a good question, though. We can look into that.
Have you looked at any sites?
I'm sorry?
Have you looked at any sites around town yourself?
No specific sites.
No, right now, it's very difficult to look at a site until we kind of nail down what we want to have. As you can see, there's a difference of almost double the size. So we know an acre and a half for an indoor because it's more contained, versus the 2 to 2.5 for an outdoor. So I think the site is really going to be, the need for a site is going to be driven by whether it's indoor or outdoor, and the type of traffic calling that an outdoor pool draws seasonally is very different than what an indoor pool draws on a year-round basis. So we have not finalized anything like that. We're starting to just gather information on what parcels are out there, whether they're town-owned or private-owned. But again, keeping in mind, these are costs based on just cost of construction, not the cost of purchasing any additional land. So if the town didn't have any land that was feasible for development into a swimming pool complex, you'd have to look at purchasing a private property. So that would get added to this as an acquisition cost.
In the list of towns that you had up there that had swimming pools, I think Sudbury was the one who broke even or was profitable. And I was curious if you had an opportunity to find out what they did differently than the other towns.
Actually, if I remember correctly, that was Lexington, and it's because they have a lot of, it's an outdoor facility, and they have a lot of different activities that happen at that pool because it's a larger facility, more amenities to it, especially fun recreational amenities like slides.
It's interesting, and this is not, I can't tell you that this was a definitive cost, but there was an article in the paper maybe a month ago about the city of Worcester, and they do not charge for their pool facilities, is my understanding. Again, this is what I read in the paper, and just because I read the paper doesn't mean it's 100% accurate, but it was an interesting article. And they said that operating costs on an annual basis for one pool, which is very, very large, it is a city, and 2 splash parks is $425,000 a year. And that's without any fees coming in for pool passes or seasonal passes or daily passes. That being said, I don't know that they don't offset their costs with other programs that actually do have a cost. Maybe there's no cost for a daily swim, but maybe there is a cost if you actually have a swim lesson. So maybe they do have other ways to generate it. So again, those costs really depend on the size of the community and whether the community decides to move forward and charge a fee or not. We can offset some of these costs with seasonal fees, daily fees, passes. Those costs are also all over the place. We've seen daily fees that range from $2 up to $10. So it all depends on the facility and what you have to offer.
One of the things we mentioned at the last meeting is, some communities offer, if they do charge a fee for anything, whether it's swimming lessons or a daily pass, they typically charge a lower fee for residents and a higher fee for people out of town.
And actually, that's a good point. The question was brought up at the last meeting, and several people commented on it in the notes section on the survey, that many people were saying, it would be nice to have a pool, but we'd like to have it just be for Auburn residents. And I just want to make sure that we respond to that comment as well, that primarily that would be very, very difficult to do. If a pool facility ultimately goes on to any land that was purchased by the town using any federal or state dollars, then the facility would have to be a regional facility. It has to be available to the public, not just the Auburn public, but the public, because in those cases, state and federal dollars have gone into the purchase of that facility. So most pools that you see, as a matter of fact, I have yet to find one that was only resident only. As Jeff said, you can charge different fee structures. They have to be considered reasonable, and the definition of reasonable is always up for interpretation, I think, but you can charge different fees, but to the best of my knowledge, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to limit it only to Auburn residents. Because ultimately, if the town wanted to apply for any type of state or federal funding, we would not be eligible for it if it wasn't available to the public. Look around Auburn, all of our parks, everything, it's open to the public. They're public parks, and you try to encourage Auburn residents to use it, but you can't preclude others from coming into public facilities, because it is just that, it's a public facility. That being said, it's also important to note that those fees that you can charge for non-residents help offset your operating costs. So Auburn residents could participate in swimming programs and use the facilities at a reduced cost if you were charging a little bit more for non-residents to utilize the facility. So it does help the resident at the end.
In this study, are we looking at the median income of towns and the population to see how affordable it is?
Yes, yeah. Yes, we're looking at all that, yes. We're also looking at, because the data is not specific to Auburn, we're looking at the population within a tighter radius of Auburn and a tighter radius as well as further out to include all those things. Well, for Auburn, we can look at the demographics of the income and all that, but then looking further out, we're looking at numbers that help us better understand the demand for a facility like this. So we're getting survey results, but also the data that Barbara's putting together also identifies kind of some national data that comes from the census from kind of rings around Auburn to know if there's an interest or might be a demand or interest in a facility like this from more of a regional basis, as we were talking about earlier, and that'll all be part of the report too. Talk about the next steps, which actually I'll start that by walking us through these questions here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm jumping.
So the next step is going to be for us to focus in on what is the preference of the town for indoor versus outdoor, because then that starts to drive the more detailed analysis of the costs, for construction as we talked about, for operating, for what's going to be in it, and then for where it could be located. So one of the reasons we're having more of a dialogue tonight is because these questions are simple survey questions. Now that there's a better understanding of what you want so that we could attach a price to that, and you understand the price difference between an indoor versus an outdoor, we're very interested in hearing from the people in this room, what are your thoughts on an indoor versus an outdoor, now understanding the cost differential for those facilities that were identified as priority facilities.
Yeah, I'd like to see an indoor pool.
Still interested in indoor, okay? Any other reaction? Yeah.
Still kind of early for me to tell based on the cost. So I mean, if I'm going to pay X amount for an indoor per year in taxes versus Y, I have to understand that and how many people are planning on using it. So again, if you come back and say 500 people in the town can use it, we only need X size pool and a kiddie, that might cost us $3 million. You know, so I think it might be premature to decide right now what indoor and outdoor. I prefer an indoor, but again, if we're only going to get 500 people using it, it's going to put us in a $600,000 deficit a year. Maybe that's not what we want to do. So I think it's early for me anyways.
Okay. Well, one thing I would advise is that at a minimum you want a 25-meter lap pool, the size for that pool. And again, as I said earlier, that doesn't just get used for lap swimming. It can be used for lap swimming, it can be used for swim lessons, it can be used for free swim, all those, and therapy, all those different things. Even though it's not heated, it can still be used for exercise and therapy. So there is a minimum that we would recommend, because if you go smaller than that, then that really decreases the types of programs you can run out of that pool. So 25-millimeter lap pool is what we're recommending as a minimum. But I certainly agree. So, therapy pool, there was a big interest in that. It would generate some revenue. Not that we're doing this whole thing just to generate revenue, but it's one of the factors, but it may not be a high priority. Same with the kiddie pool. If the 25 millimeter pool is open for family use at certain times of the day or certain days of the week, then it meets that need. And I think that gets back to your comment about how many people would want to use it. If it looks like there isn't such a demand for swim teams and swim lessons, that the lap pool really could be busy hours a day, 6 days or 7 days a week, then you would need a second pool for these other things. But if it's not going to be that busy, then there's more variety of what can happen in that one pool. But we do need to kind of focus in on something. But yeah, when we do cost estimates, we do it by components. So we can look at those components and then you can say, okay, we go kind of the bare minimum, it's going to cost this. What could then happen in that pool? What would the cost be to maintain that pool? Yes.
I'm still in favor of the indoor pool. I was surprised by the cost, though. That is a lot of money. But I think that you can do other things, such as the fitness center, which would help alleviate some of the costs.
Okay. What do people think about the preferences we listed? And again, they're on your agenda. You know, the indoor, the lap pool, therapy pool, kiddie pool, concession stand, splash pad, shade structure for outside. Again, this is based on survey results and input from the last meeting. Does anybody think we really missed the target on anything here?
Could you build in stages? You have to build the whole thing at once.
You could build in stages. Yeah.
Just like do the splash pad later on.
Definitely a splash pad later on. That's a standalone component. And even if it was an indoor facility, you just did a lap pool, you'd want to pick a site knowing you would want to add into that later on. But then you could do, we looked at one example that had the lap pool in the main building, and then it was connected to the main pool, but it's kind of a separate wing for the therapy pool, so there's a little more privacy there. It was all part of the same complex, but that could be added on at a later date as an example. So yeah, that's certainly possible.
Is it fair to say, based on your comment and some of the other ones that we received too, a lot of survey respondents, while they took the survey at the end, made the comment that when there are more cost analysis that's done, which again, we had to do it this way because we didn't know what features we wanted to include. But the comments we received were when there's more cost analysis, that may drive my decision on whether I want to support this or support A, B, or C. And I think that's what you're saying too, which is that, we need to give you more data to make your decision, just like we need to have more data to go to the Board of Selectmen and go to the residents to be able to say, here are your options and here are your costs.
There's another map called a video on how a swimming pool is.
Yes,
That since now it's gone, yes. And then also the Ramada, I have looked at, the Ramada used to have a pool that they rented out or gave lessons and other things in way back when. I have some of any data on that as well.
I don't have any data. I can tell you that we did reach out to a couple of the local colleges a couple of summers ago to see if we could rent their facility or somehow use their facility in the summer and offer swimming lessons, provide a bus from Auburn to take Auburn children to those facilities. And the two facilities that I'm aware of both did not have any availability to lease it out to a town for regular use because they use it for sports clubs. So that was a bit of an issue. You were looking at pools, I believe, in the region, just to see what our competition is. There aren't that many pools. YMCA, YWCA, JCC.
Yeah. And that's why some of the initial analysis data says there most likely is a demand for another facility like this in this region.
So I'm curious to ask also if, now that we're getting more data on this and we have more costs and we've presented it and this is what we wanted to hear, do the costs of either an indoor or an outdoor make people stop and say, stop, we don't want to do anything? But it sounds like people are still interested and want us to pursue it, which we are anyway through the study. But would it make sense at a later date for us to either have, give people the opportunity to get information to us, or for the town to embark on the secondary survey that we put together and just put out some more specific information? Would you be willing to support an indoor pool that costs this with this impact on the taxpayers? And would you think that something like that would make sense for the residents to see and actually have a chance to weigh in?
To me, it sounds like that's the direction we need to go next. Studies go all over the place. Some communities would say, no way we're paying for an indoor facility. We just don't have the interest, the appetite, or the potential revenue source. But considering everybody's still open to it, I think we need to provide more information to drill down further into this.
Is there any towns around here that have an indoor pool?
I believe, I'm sorry, my grandma.
Lexington is that outdoor.
All right, one that we had looked at did have an indoor. And I believe it's only one. It was Sudbury.
Oh, that's okay.
And as you said, the cost is almost double for, or even a little bit more for the difference between an outdoor and an indoor. So that is a cost consideration. Again, if you can look at ways to generate revenues, and your annual maintenance costs and your operating costs are about the same, but the preliminary data that's coming back is not saying that.
Correct.
It's saying that even with the outside revenues that you can generate through an indoor facility, shouldn't confuse it to the additional revenues you can generate through an indoor facility, likely will not cover your operating costs on an annual basis. It's what is that delta? Is it, somebody said, is it $600,000 a year, or is it $100,000 a year? So I think we need to get drilled in.
And that was our analysis based on the type of facilities or type of elements we're looking at right now. If you go to a big indoor aquatics park, you can probably generate revenue that's going to cover your operating costs, but don't quote me on this number, but we're talking 20, 30, 40 million bucks or something like that. So it's a whole different animal.
And I think we need to keep in mind that what we're trying to accomplish here is what is the demand in the town for this type of thing? What is the desire of the residents to pay more taxes to support something like this? And then keeping in mind that the intent is so that children can learn how to swim, our seniors can swim for exercise, all ages can swim for exercise. So I think it's great to have all the other pieces, but we have to keep in mind the intent is still the swimming pool, so maybe you can ratchet down some of the other components of it. That sounds great, but do we really want to pay for those, and can we get that type of recreation elsewhere? What would be the types of things that we want for our residents and that we feel would generate some revenues for us from outside the community to help offset the costs to the taxpayer as well. It's interesting, I look at Steve because I'm not sure if you had heard it or you had suggested it, but not suggesting it for us, but just saying that there are all kinds of things out there, including zip lining, and I had never heard of zip lining into a pool before. It's quite an interesting concept. I don't think I'd want to zip line into a swimming pool, but it just goes to show you that there are elements that are way beyond what we're trying to accomplish here. And it sounds great, it sounds exciting, and there may be people who want to do that, but at the end of the day, is that what the majority of the residents want? So that's why we put this survey out with the questions, what kinds of amenities would you like? So BSC did incorporate those into that cost that you see. And again, maybe there isn't a need for both a kiddie pool and a splash park. Maybe you could have one or the other. Maybe, to Mark's point, maybe down the road you do a phased approach where you do your basic swimming pool, your basic facilities, and you make sure that there's land space to put in a splash pool, put in a splash pool. So there are so many different options, but I think we just have to keep in mind that the intent is that we want children to learn how to swim. We want maybe to support a swim team in the middle school or the high school. We want to be able to give adults recreational opportunities that include swimming, because all ages, it's good for all ages. There's therapeutic reasons, there's health reasons. So I think keeping those things in mind kind of temper what amenities we may want to look at or include, because it all sounds wonderful, but at the end it does need to get paid for. And I believe the more amenities you add, the more space you're going to need, especially in an outside facility. So, and again, for us, in town administration, we're always thinking, well, where could this go? What is the next step on that? But it really is determining the acreage. It's too premature to say, well, let's put it over there, because we don't know over there if there's acreage, if there's parking, if there's access. And it really does depend if it's a seasonal facility or a year-round facility. That does make a big difference.
Yeah, but I think, we're not talking about 10s and 20, 30 acres of land here. So I think that'll give us a lot of flexibility for where this could go.
Any other?
Any other comments? I know Julie asked earlier the next steps. So our next step, again, is to drill down deeper, and it sounds like we'll regroup, but I think we need to drill down deeper and get more information about costs to build, costs to operate, and potential revenue to offset those costs. And I'm going to recommend that we probably have to do another survey with some more detailed information to it. But we also want to give people who may be listening to this, who aren't here tonight, some time to respond to your office. So we probably should give a certain time frame for that before we then go out and put the next survey up. So 2 weeks? So.
Yeah, I think it would be fair if we recommended to the residents, if they can get to us, whether they send an email or whether they send something in writing to us or place a phone call, if you could get us your comments on what you heard tonight in the next 2 weeks. In the interim, we can start working on the last piece of the survey that we need to do, which is put more information out there and now really have the residents drill down into, here's option A, B, and C, where do we stand on these options. But I think 2 weeks is fair. I know we have a 4th of July holiday coming up, so it's kind of hard, but once that summer kicks in, it's hard to get people to get back to you on things, and we don't want to hold this up. So, I don't want to say within a week, because if anyone's away or not here this week, I don't want them to feel they lost the opportunity. So I would just generally say, by the 4th of July holiday, it would be nice for us to have it. So right after the 4th, we can jump back in and incorporate the feedback that we get into the next steps.
Yes.
Again, if any of you have additional questions or thoughts, don't hesitate. We don't want to have people feel concerned that they can't ask a question because it's being televised and it's going to be taped. You can certainly talk to us after. Our whole intent for taping it is to make sure that those people who can't get here this evening for many reasons have the opportunity to see what we're talking about and have a say in it. This is something that's going to affect every resident, every taxpayer, businesses, residents as well. So we just want to make sure that we have an open process and we give every opportunity there is for people to give us comments. And again, I would say just a word of caution that there were some comments that were made on non-official Facebook sites, etc. in Auburn, and that's not that we can't use that type of information. We really have to use the official Auburn sites for our information. That's where that way we know we're getting accurate information, and also on our own social media page we have been promoting this, and again through the survey. So that would likely be the next step. So we just encourage you to go back to your families and talk about it with your neighbors, your friends, see where they are, and get back to us. We just want to ensure that this is an inclusive process.
Would you rent out to groups? If the group wants to come and use the pool for a day?
Yes, that's part of that. The question is, would you reach out to groups? Part of the potential for revenue generation would be sports teams, athletic teams, swim teams, not just here, but in other communities. Would they be willing to pay a fee to utilize the facility for their lessons of their team? It would also be reaching out to the public. I think there was one slide up there that showed potential for rentals of special events and parties. So do you reach out to corporations and say, we have this facility, would you be willing to hold your corporate event there? So that's definitely part of the research that the SC is doing.
This can be popular for birthday parties.
Of all ages. Not just kidding. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank BSC and all the work that you've done. We're going to continue to do this work. This study had about a 6-month period, so we were aiming for the end of September, but we really were trying to get our initial conversations with the residents going early on to help guide the process. So stay tuned, there'll be another survey coming out. This one will be more specific, it will be a little bit more targeted. We're probably going to ask for a little bit more demographic data from the respondents. Again, not trying to intimidate people, but it would be helpful for us to know what age group are you in, just certain demographic. Do you have children? How many children do you have? And we're senior. That would be helpful for us to understand where that demand is being driven. So the next survey will likely have some more information that we'd be looking for. We just really need to just get it started somewhere. To be honest, if the survey had gone out and the majority were overwhelmingly coming back and saying, don't look at this, it would have taken a little different track. The fact that we have a lot of interest, it's great for us. It encourages us to keep going and get to that next step. So
what happens after 6 months? What's the next step?
Well, the study will be done. We'll have all the data. And at that point, I would say that we probably would be presenting it to the Board of Selectmen, because the Board of Selectmen ultimately is the entity that needs to decide to accept the $1 million donation. And see if the Board of Selectmen, at that point, feel they have enough information. Would they want to have a public hearing as well? Generally, when they have a very big item to decide, even smaller items, they like to have public hearings to solicit input that they would hear. This is town administration. We're all trying to hear from you and incorporate it into a study. When it moves along, I think the Board of Selectmen is going to want to hear from the residents and the taxpayers about how they feel. Because at that point, Mark, there'll be more specific recommendations than we have now. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Dr. Pappas, for that generous offer to the town that started this whole process. And if I could just say, you and Dr. Pappas have been so philanthropic to Auburn. We have such great facilities here because of you and your family and the foundation. And we're grateful, and we're very grateful for the grant to do this, because this didn't cost the taxpayers, other than our time, which is critical. We need to put our time into this. This is important. I just want people to know this didn't cost the taxpayers anything. The grant is funding all of this, which is excellent. We're grateful. Thank you. Thanks.